Well, hello, and welcome back to that thing we like to call Curlis Mania, where we talk all things pop, rock, and prog. And we are back to talk some more prog today. And before I do anything else, I have to not introduce, I have to welcome back my guest, my prestigious guest. His name is Scott Davis. How are you, Scott?
Well, I don't know how prestigious I am, but you're too kind. Thanks, Tom. I'm very glad to be back here. This is always fun.
Absolutely. We always have a good time. So, of course, I always have to mention that Scott is essentially is Myth of Logic, is a band. You think it's a band, it's not. It's all Scott, and he just completed. I mean, I'll let you take it from here. He just completed a new record.
That's correct. The light at the end. The new I got tongue twisted. The new record, Light at the End, is coming out September 15th. It's the final chapter in the Here and There trilogy, which follows my main character, Robin, and it sort of ties up his story in a not so neat little bow, but it does end his story. I'm real happy with how it came out. Alan Doubt just mastered it for me once again. New artwork by the fantastic Mr. Charlie Roy. Everything else you hear and see is me, essentially. But yeah, I'm excited for it to come out. There's been a bunch of pre-orders. I'm going to have the CDs in hand probably next week sometime late, and I'll start getting those out to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hopeful that in coming years people will treat it as I really intended, and that is treating the trilogy as a work, as three chapters of the same work. It's 3.5 hours long, but
Absolutely. No, and it's yeah, no, and it's exciting when you get that physical seat, when you actually get the product and you're opening up the box and it's exciting. I can't wait to get the physical thing. I can't wait because I'm a physical media guy, so
oh yeah,
I'm excited to get the actual album, the CD, whatever I get,
yep,
and it's gonna be
and you
good.
will be.
It's gonna be good because I got a little sneak preview, and I'm telling you, it's if you like the other records, you're gonna love this one too. So,
Thank you.
yeah, but we are here to talk. I think I'm giving it away already. We are here to talk Emerson, Lake and Palmer today,
Mhm.
or Emerson, Lake and Powell. We are here to talk about E.L. Powell versus Emerson, Lake and Palmer. 1986 versus 1992, the self-titled Emerson Lake and Powell versus Emerson Lake and Palmer Black Moon. So we are talking about a different era. We're talking about reunion era here.
Mhm.
Because I always like to say that ELP has a couple different, there's a couple different, eras of ELP. The first is the classic era, right? 1970 to 1974, the debut through brain salad surgery. It's just absolute classic ELP, right?
Sure.
Without, I mean, just no, barely a wrong note on all those records. And then we got 1977 to 79, which is I call it the average years, where it's like Works Volume One, Works Volume Two, and Love Beach. Um, and basically then there's 1980. I have the last era is 1986 to 1998, which is the reunion era. Is kind of what I call that. So for me there's three distinct eras of this band, and we are here to talk about the beginning of the reunion era.
Right.
So just to give I always like to give a little bit of backstory, just a quick
Sure.
backstory, make it real quick, and that is, and then I'm going to hand it over to Scott. But basically, 1978, they had just done this huge tour for Works where they had a huge orchestra and they were losing money like crazy, and they finally had to go back to a trio to make money. And Works Volume One and Two was kind of like after the first break, and Keith wanted to do a concerto and he did it, and he wanted an orchestra on tour and he got it. But I think there was a little bit of contention about all of this within the band. Anyway, they made Works Volume 1 and 2, and then they said, okay, we're going to take another break. And Amon Erdogan at Atlantic said, whoa, 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 not so fast. Like, hold on a minute, you're not going to take another break. You just took a break. I need another record from you guys. And so they said, oh, okay. And so he kind of forced them to go back in the studio, and the idea being that, hey, let's try to do something a little bit more radio friendly. Genesis had just broken through with Follow You, Follow Me. They'd had a big hit. So like, hey, they used to be a huge prog band. They just had a big radio hit. You could probably do the same thing. So why don't you try it? So they went in and said, okay, we'll give it a shot. Out came the album Love Beach, where, they didn't do themselves any favors by looking like the Bee Gees on the cover. And they had a couple songs one of was called Taste of My Love, which is just, the lyrics are just abysmal. But there are some moments on Love Beach, like Canario and Officer Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman, which I like quite a bit. Those two out songs I like quite a bit. So
Yeah.
it's not all bad. That album's not that bad. In fact, check it out. One of my friend Bicycle Legs has an In Defense of Love Beach, and he does a really good job of defending the album. So anyway, long story short is they I think they were going to try to, they should have really, if they really had the strength of their convictions, they should have toured for Love Beach. They didn't. They decided to be done. We're done. I think that Greg and Keith at this point were really starting to not get along very well, because Greg ended up leaving that record before it was even over. So essentially, and that's really unlike Greg. He took off before it was even finished. So I think there was a lot of this going on between them. So anyway, years go by. Greg Lake does some solo records. I think Keith does some movie soundtracks, some solo things. Carl Palmer goes to Asia, and then years go by, and then all of a sudden we get to 1985, and they decide, hey, it'd be kind of cool to get ELP back together. And they call Carl. Keith and Greg kind of started making this plan. They call Carl up, and he says, "Sorry, man, wish I could do it. I'm in Asia, can't do it." So Keith calls his friend Cozy Powell and says, "Hey, could you play drums? Your last name ends with P, or starts with P, so it'd be perfect. So why don't we do that? You're a great drummer. Let's go." So they get together and they decide to make a record, and that's where I'm going to hand it over to Scott for his take on Emerson, Lake and Powell.
Well, yeah. Um, Emerson Lake and Powell. I love this record. Bringing Cozy in was a brave step. It really was, because Cozy and Carl, both supremely, stunningly talented drummers, but couldn't possibly be more different from one another. In the musician world, Cozy is what we call a bottom kit drummer. He's more about the kick drums and toms the and the 2 and 4 feel of that kind of thing. Carl is more of a top kit guy, brass, snare, that kind of accent and emphasis. And that was the first era of ELP. And they said, let's bring Cozy in. And they did. And he suited the material very well. Let's see here. The notes I've got: shortly into recording of Emerson, Lake and Powell, which was released June 2nd, 1986, and produced by Tony Taverner and Greg Lake. At that point, I'm going to mention what I feel is the two important elements to a great Emerson, Lake and Palmer record, and why certain ones of their records aren't as good as others. Two things. First, Greg Lake must be the solo producer, the sole producing credit, period. No one understood how that band needed to be produced better than Greg Lake, and he knew that instinctively from the beginning. No pun intended. First element. Second element, Hammond organ. There are several ELP albums that have no Hammond organ, and those are at the bottom of the pile, my friends. Emerson is a Hammond player, always was, always will be. The two albums we're going to talk about today, fortunately, have Hammond smeared all over them. You have to listen for it, because sometimes buried under a bunch of synthesizers, but it's there. Shortly into the beginning of the recording of the Powell record, as I call it, Emerson's barn studio was destroyed by a runaway tractor, requiring some parts of the album to be re-recorded, and causing him to joke, quote, "Perhaps we should have called it Emerson Lake and Plow." Specifically, the Yamaha GX1 uh, big synthesizer that he was using much up to that point, it was destroyed, and he had to go find another one, which I believe he purchased from John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, or at least it possibly. I don't remember. The album's debut single was "Touch and Go." It peaked at number 60 on the Billboard charts on 19 July of 1986. Cashbox called it a thunderous, large-scale rock drama. The main synthesizer riff in Touch and Go is based on an English folk tune called Lovely Joan. I did not know that. Another version of Touch and Go was recorded by Emerson Lake and Palmer and is included in the Return of the Manticore box set from 1983. And it's also very good. It's down a whole tone, it's got a different feel to it. But anyway, let's dig right in here. It starts with the score. Written by Emerson, music and lyrics by Lake. It's very of the time, with hints of works era grandiosity. The GX1 is front and center and being put to its full use. Production is big and wet, as many records of the late 80s were. Powell is immediately asserting himself as that bottom kit player that we mentioned earlier. The voice, Mr. Lake, enters at 3:53 and bids us welcome to the show. The hairs stand up just thinking about it, because in those days the album was new. We were so glad they were back.
Yeah.
And the first song, he's saying, "Welcome back, my friends." And we're like, "Oh my God, am I dreaming?" You know,
That's such a great touch. It is.
oh,
It's
it is. It's a wonderful,
yeah.
okay, maybe it's a little bit pandering, but who cares? I don't care. Is it a blatant stab at sentiment? Fine, whatever. I'm good with it. In the early parts of the song, I wish the Hammond was a little higher in the mix, but my wish is granted when a swirling instrumental part comes in that just got Hammond all over it. Another verse, we get a soaring synth melody that perfectly captures the emotion of that return. We're so happy, like I said, to have them back and get rewarded with such a rock solid opening track. It was just a rare treat. I mean, so many artists often release a record after a long rest and it disappoints, but not here. Second, Learning to Fly. Again, music by Emerson, lyric by Lake, modulating up and exactly in time with the end of the score. This one kicks right in with an army of aggressive sampled plucked strings. It feels very much like Son of Pirates, honestly. And much of the album has that feel, that texture, and the lyrical bigness that was the song Pirates, which was itself part of a discarded film score that they had been working on at one point and adapted to the Works Volume 1 version that we all know. A fleet fingered synth, here we go. Lead section modulates up again for another verse before coming back down for the chorus and fade. A lyrical bell synthesizer interlude modulates into the start of The Miracle. Track 3, The Miracle. Music by Emerson, lyrics by Lake. The first three pieces really do form a modern epic, if you will. They really do flow from one into the other, and you kind of feel like they were stabbing at that. Something of a mission statement. Lake is in fine form throughout, but particularly shines on The Miracle. By 1986, the available keyboard technology had caught up with Emerson's imagination, and you really hear it here. The Hammond once again makes a welcome appearance. Powell's more direct style really suits the material. His parts are not likely what Palmer would have played, but I think that's a good thing. Progress is a good thing. And ironically, at this time, Palmer was otherwise committed to playing more like that in Asia.
Mhm.
Anyway, the refrain once again calls back to Pirates. Track 4, Touch and Go. Again, music by Emerson, lyrics by Lake. We're seeing a pattern here. And what is that pattern, folks? Good ELP is the product of Keith Emerson and Greg Lake. When they stray from that, bad things happen, or less satisfying things happen. We'll see that as we go on. That riff, it gives way to a synth choir sound and a percussive loop, very inventively used. Lake tells a tale of street people finding out eking out an existence in almost a rapping kind of a rhythmic style. Then more of the main riff and swinging chord work over an insistent backing track. The wider keyboard scope leaves less room for the famous Lake cutting bass guitar sound, but it's placed in the frequency spectrum so that it does support the rest of the instrumentation nicely. Love Blind, track number 5. Again, music by Emerson, lyrics by Lake. Another key change and another breathy keyboard patch. If there is a song on this album that is screaming for crunchy rhythm guitar, this one is it. Every time I hear this song, I always say to myself, why didn't Greg grab a Les Paul and just chunk out underneath it? It really has a hole in its frequency spectrum that was really screaming out for that. And he's really good with that stuff. I'm surprised. Matter of fact, it wouldn't shock me to find if I had access to the master tapes, if there wasn't a rhythm guitar sound on there and it got mixed out.
Yeah.
An instrumental interlude with yet more interesting synth textures brings about another key change before returning to a verse and refrain. The whole thing rounds off with a nice Emerson lead into the fade. It might be the runt of the litter. I've got in my notes here on this album. It might be, with the exception of one of the bonus tracks, which we'll get to here in a minute. But on the official release, Love Line might be the one song that kind of doesn't live up to the rest. Track 6, Step Aside. Again, Emerson music, Lake lyrics. A nice little jazzy noir piece. Very sympathetic backing work from Powell and Lake. Listen closely to their playing on this song. Emerson's the star, but if you listen closely to what Powell and Lake are playing behind him, it's very supportive and sympathetic, and very mature choices are made by those two players. Very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Let's see here. This one also gives Lake a chance to really show what he can do vocally. At turns rich and deep, and then suddenly high and powerful. On the whole, a very nice addition to the ELP canon. I really wish Emerson would have been allowed to go a little longer with his piano excursions on this piece because it's a relatively short track. Okay, as we go down, we're at track number 7, Lay Down Your Guns. Music by Emerson and lyrics by Lake and a man named Steve Gould. I looked up his history and didn't really see anything I was familiar with, so I didn't make any notes. This is Emerson and Lake at their big, pompous, theatrical height. It could be an outtake from the Pirates movie score that never happened. You can almost see the credits rolling at the end of a movie as it unfolds.
Yes. Yeah.
Another fine Emerson lead section at the close. The overall texture perfectly sets up Mars, the Bringer of War, track number 8, which was written by Gustav Holt and adapted by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. We have timpanis announcing the entrance of Mars, and there are major dynamic shifts through the whole thing. Swelling minor key brass shifting in the background, almost imperceptibly increasing in volume until it gets much more serious. Once the drums kicks in, it starts to feel like the Sorcerer's Apprentice almost, gaining slowly in intensity and malice. You really feel the anger that it's supposed to convey. The whole thing ebbs and flows like an angry tide, crashing and retreating. A masterful realization and an excellent addition to the legend. The story behind that piece, there are many different versions to that story. One was that the record company suggested. He said, go to hell. And then when Cozy came on board, he said, well, by the way, I used to use that as my solo bit in several bands that I've played in. And he played some tapes for him. And Keith said, okay, well, maybe we should revisit that. Another version of that story is that it was not planned at all. They weren't going to do a classical bit at all. And Cozy came in and said, look, if I'm playing with Keith Emerson and Greg Lake, I want to do a classical piece. And here's the one. Who knows? All three gentlemen have left us now. So no one's really around to give us the correct story.
Yeah.
That's the end of the album proper. The final 2 tracks I'm going to include in here are part of the additional tracks that were included. The Locomotion. I love it. I absolutely love it. I know ELP fans that hate it.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's an extra track. Okay, it's a little goofy, but it kicks ass, and I love it. I can't help myself when that song comes on. It's just so cool, and they lay into it. All 3 of them are just they're committed to it. You can
They're
hear it.
having fun. They're definitely having fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost feels like Hoedown Jr.
Mhm. Right.
In some of the sections. It just proves my theory that Emerson and Lake can make almost anything kick ass.
Right.
You know, they just take
Yes.
something and yeah. The
And
last track on the Vacant Possession is the last extra track. Again, music by Emerson, lyrics by Lake. It's a nice little pop song. It's got some wonderful bits that never really arrive anywhere. It doesn't have a hook. It doesn't have a chorus. It kind of lays there a little bit. Lake sings his heart out, but the refrain never really lands for me. Even the really cool, unpredictable middle section can't quite save it. I think that's really, you know, kind of there's a reason why that was an extra track. But the Locomotion should have been on there. I love that. I absolutely love it. But yeah,
no.
like I said before, I mean, this was 1986. Prog was at a nil really in the world, and hair metal had taken over the world. And here comes Emerson, Lake and Powell, and I remember the video, and we were so excited. All of us were just over the moon for it.
Mm,
So yeah, and
yeah.
it has aged well. I really enjoyed going back and re-listening. I had a good time with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's very nostalgic for me as well because I was a big ELP fan at the time. I was loving all the 70s stuff and to hear that they were coming back and getting back together and putting out an album, I was also very excited. And
Oh yeah.
I went out and bought this CD and you could tell I had to dig this CD out. I bought this at the time and you could
Uh-huh.
I wrote my name on the back because I didn't want someone to steal it. That's
Careless for the
back in the
win.
day, I had that big Sharpie out, man. Let's put my name on this thing because it means a lot to me. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, no, I was all in when this came out. I was same here. I was so excited, and when I heard the score, I was like, yes. I was the same way as you. I was so into it. I was 100%. I was like, yes, this is ELP is back, and
Yep.
they're retooled for the '80s, and they're killing it. Um, and I just especially I mean, the score, whenever I put it on, I just was listening to it for this episode, and I love it. I still absolutely love it. I think it's such a great leadoff track.
Yeah, it is. It's a real killer lead off.
Oh my god, it's great. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. And then, like you said, the first 3 songs, really, "Learning to Fly" and "The Miracle," I agree that they are kind of like a suite, almost. They kind of blend into each other a little bit. And I think all of those are top-notch songs. And "Touch and Go" was a great single. It was on the radio. I mean,
Yeah.
it had a great hook. It sounded very ELP, that whole do 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 do. I was like, "Yeah, this sounds like ELP to me." And it was on the radio, so they succeeded with getting on the radio with that. Love Blind, I agree with you. Maybe it could be the weakest track on the record. It's not bad. It's just not that memorable after what came before it. You know.
Right. Yeah. It's a
Um,
bit weak.
yeah. Step Aside is sort of like you said, sort of jazzy piano.
I like the contrast.
Yeah, sort of like the jazziness of it, where it's like,
Mhm.
oh, he's playing piano, acoustic piano, and it's a little, like you said, very sympathetic accompaniment from Cozy and Greg. Um, Lay Down Your Guns. That's my note said the same thing. It said it sounded like a movie soundtrack song.
Yeah.
Sound like it could play at the end of a movie during the yeah, something like that. And then of course Mars, the Bringer of War. I mean, they had to do one classical adaptation, right? And they do it well. They do it very well. And it's funny because story is I went to go see my niece and she plays violin and she's in an orchestra and they played the planets and they did the whole planets thing and all of a sudden I'm like, there it is, Mars Bringing War. Yes, I was like, I was familiar with it because of this.
Mhm.
They started doing the ding 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 and I'm like, oh yeah, here it comes, Mars Bringing War. So so I felt like I was cultured because so thank you. Thanks guys. Um
I
so- yeah.
I actually had, Isao Tomita, the Japanese, synthesizer pioneer, did an electronic version of The Planets, and I had that record years before in the '70s, and
Mhm.
so I had heard it, but only from that. That's all. I had never heard an orchestral version or any other approach to it. So
Yeah, it was cool.
yeah,
It was really
yeah,
cool. So, but I'm telling you, I really this album surprised me. Getting ready for this again, I thought, okay, I'm gonna be nostalgic because I was like 17 at the time. I was excited. I was an ELP fan. I thought, and it still is nostalgic for me. We went to go see them in concert. We saw them at I think it was either Madison Square Garden or Brendan Byrne. I can't remember, but we saw the tour.
nice.
We saw the tour, and the tour was really good too. They were great live. So I have great memory of that as well. And so I was just thinking, okay, this is going to be a nostalgia exercise, and maybe it's not going to be that strong. I think it's strong. I still think this album is strong. I when I was
Yeah,
listening to this, I was enjoying the hell out of it. So I'm really think this is a strong record and probably maybe possibly a bit overlooked.
yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. The other
Maybe.
thing too, we're talking about the tour. I unfortunately did not get to see that tour. I saw them twice on the Works tour, and I saw Black Moon tour, but I never got to see that tour. I was
Oh, you saw the Works tour.
twice. Yeah,
Wow. All
I
right.
saw them with and without the orchestra.
Oh
And
man.
honestly, they were better without the orchestra. It was a mess with the orchestra.
Was it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. It was not an enjoyable sonic experience. They were overreaching at that particular show, I think. It
Yeah.
was just too much. To put an orchestra in an arena with a rock band and in those days in 1977 expect the technology to carry you, that was no.
It's
But
intimidating.
when I saw them again, 6, 8 months later, in the trio format. Yeah, it was awesome. But
That was
honestly,
terrific.
the best show I ever saw them out of the three was the Black Moon tour. It was just incredible.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they that Black Moon tour was unreal, absolutely unreal.
All right.
The technology had caught up with them, and
Mhm.
um, I saw them in a beautiful theater in Kansas City. Uh, the name was escape the Midland, I think it was. It was one of those old theaters with the red drapes and the chandeliers, and it was just perfect for ELP.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic show. Anyway,
I don't know why I didn't see them on the Black Moon tour, but anyway, that brings us to the next album. Let's jump
Black Moon.
Black Moon from 1992, which was released on Victory Records. So and I think was it May of 92, I
May
believe.
of '92. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So so I'm gonna get hand it over to Scott again for Black Moon. Let's jump into that one.
Yeah, May of '92. Production credits are Mark Mancina, Ian Morrow, John Van Tongeren. There is no Greg Lake to be found in the production credits.
Yeah, which is a
What
shame.
does that remind you of? Yes did something similar with an album called Union, and it, it did not work out well. It seemed like all the bands that we loved at that time were involving too many cooks,
Oh
you
God.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Ahmet Ertegun, who you mentioned, uh, great music lover, he should have understood. He should have come to these people and said, "Look, if you want a great ELP record, you kick everybody out, you let Greg do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and let the other guys do what they do, and then you get a great ELP record. You might get a great record, but it's not gonna be a great ELP record."
Right.
Black Moon is the eighth studio album and the first in 14 years from Emerson Lake and Palmer. The band had broken up in '79 and recorded Black Moon to kick off their '90s revival. The track Affairs of the Heart originated in summer '88 sessions by Lake with Jeff Downs under the project name Ride the Tiger. Another song from the session, Money Talks, became Paper Blood with a different chorus and new music. Ride the Tiger was finally released in 2015, and it's kind of missable, I think. Half of the songs were played on the band's '92, '93 concerts. Greg included the songs Paper Blood, Farewell to Arms and Footprints in the Snow in the set list of his 2005 solo tour. Farewell to Arms was played at the group's final concert at the High Voltage Festival in July 2000 2000. All right, starts out with Black Moon. I'm calling this album the Plod album. There are several songs that just plod. Dum, dum,
Duh,
dum,
duh,
dum,
duh. Yeah.
dum, dum. You
Yes.
can almost hear the click track.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
this is an album, I have to tell you, for those viewing that don't know, Emerson Lake and Palmer is my favorite band ever, bar none. It's they are so far above everybody else for me. They are my favorite band. And when Black Moon came out, I loved it and listened to it constantly.
Mhm.
It has not aged as well as I thought it would. Anyway, first off, we have Black Moon, written by Emerson Lake and Palmer. Ominous synth textures give way to a scolding vocal about overall attitude and direction. Emerson manages to shine and gives his signature to what is otherwise a quite generic, plodding, and somewhat depressing start to the whole affair. Some welcome Hammond ripping at the end section gives it a little bit of humanity, but it's kind of too little too late at that point.
Yeah, he tries to
Second,
bring it to life at the end. Yeah, he tried.
yeah, yeah. Track two is Paper Blood. Emerson, Lake, and Palmer were still in the writing credits. Lake plays harmonica, but not for long. Love the continued Hammond mongering. Emerson is at his finest when he is mangling a Hammond organ. This album buries that sound under a ton of synth textures, but it still can't be denied. It's there if you listen carefully. Lake plays a little more harmonica in the middle section, which is fun. He's good. The drums are hard and mechanical sounding on both these first two tracks. I have never understood why one of the best snare drum players in the history of music would allow himself to be recorded playing a sampled snare drum. I don't understand it. It's bad enough on all the other drums. Trigger drums do not pick up Carl Palmer. They don't. There's too much subtlety to his playing. That was a serious mistake, I think. And the album would have been much better if Carl had used the real drums, but it might not have been his decision.
Yeah.
It was the fashion of the times, but the whole album really suffers for that, I think. And I'm a guy who uses sample drums in my own work, but I really work hard to make them not sound like they are. I don't always succeed,
Yep.
but the real world financial realities are that that's how I have to do my work so far.
Yep.
Even when I saw this tour live, the overall mix suffered greatly when Carl would go to his sampled drums. He had pads around his kit. And when he moved from the real snare drum to the trigger, it it changed the whole mix for the worse, and it really bothered me. Track number three, Affairs of the Heart. Music by Jeffrey Downs and lyrics by Greg Lake. It starts with lovely Lucky Man guitars and a plaintive Greg Lake vocal, which tells a tale of lost romance, one of Lake's favorites. Emerson manages to add a Hammond flourish during the first verse. Nice piano and string parts. The lyrics may be, frankly, a bit juvenile in spots, but Lake delivers them with conviction. So, you know, it's okay. Romeo and Juliet was composed by Prokofiev. Not sure why this is here, honestly. More plodding, mechanical sounding drums. It's like I don't know, they said, well, we've got this thing going with these bang, bang, bang. Romeo and Juliet, that'll work. It's quite tedious, actually. They might have stuck this into Black Moon and integrated it into Black Moon and made something more interesting of it. In spite of some fine playing from Emerson, it really does beg the question, is this the best they could do for a classical adaptation here? I used to not feel that way back in the day, and over the years, it's not really where it aged well for me. So,
No.
number five, Farewell to Arms. Again, music by Emerson, lyrics by Lake. The somber mood continues along with what I'm calling the Mattel drums. The tone, the tone is hopeful and mournful at the same time. Lake's voice has acquired a depth in the years since the last album that transmit the subject with great effectiveness. More Hammond swells prove that the Emersonian touch will fill any space. A Son of Lucky Man synth lead gives us a bit of the sentimental bit as it fades out. Um, then, okay, now we're coming to the good stuff. Changing States, written by Keith Emerson. Now, this is worth the price of admission. Although the other tracks that Emerson brought from Changing States, which was his solo record that he did prior with Kevin Gilbert very heavily involved, it loses something from there to here. If you're watching this program and you don't know about Keith's solo album, Changing States, it's kind of a dig to find. The CD is hard to find. You can't always find the streaming, but it is totally worth it. The songs that ended up on Black Moon sound better and feel better. I think the arrangements are better. Um, Filtered through whoever was producing Black Moon, they just lost something for me. The sound is thinner here, and the arrangement is too rounded off. Once again, the Hammond battling it out with the layered synthesizers is a highlight. On Changing States, Lake's bass is finally brought up closer where it belongs. You get some cut, some grind. The galloping feel calls to mind fanfare for the common man more than once. Sampled drums in and of themselves are not necessarily a bad thing, but a player of Palmer's subtlety of technique can far too easily outrun their limits. Overall, this song is the reason to own this album. It really is the highlight with one other. Track number 7 is Burning Bridges. That's a song that the producer Mark Mancina brought in, completely finished. And the other guys just kind of developed their flourishes over it. It has a slight Middle Eastern feel, and again, that plodding feel, although it's slightly faster than previously heard. It's an above average pop song, and it's not terrible. It's elevated by Emerson's genius and Lake's impassioned vocal. More big synth leads harken back to a more hallowed era, riding out with a bit more Hammond abuse, but perhaps not quite enough. It's a decent track, but it's not a great ELP track. And I don't think it really has a place here for my money. No knock on Mark Mancina. I understand he's a very nice guy, and they really liked him a lot. But I don't, I don't class that as an ELP track. Track number 8, Close to Home by Keith Emerson. This is the other reason to own this album.
Mm-hmm.
The version of Close to Home on Changing States is different. I like this one just a little better. It's simpler. It's got only piano. The other version has some guitar on it and a few other things. So much at play here. Emerson, the master, firing on all cylinders. It's at turns passionate, emotive, lovely, and a bit funny in places. It's got some humor to it. A beautiful recording and a powerful solo piano piece full of triumph and joy. It's perhaps his best solo piece ever, I feel. If the album had followed the lead of this piece a bit more closely, it may have been more impactful. When I listen to Close to Home, it fills me with so much emotion. You know, it's such a triumphant piece of music, but it makes me sad for not having the man here.
Yeah.
You know, because it reminds you that he's gone
Right.
because it's so wonderful, and the best music does that. It reminds you of those that are maybe not here anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Track number 9, Better Days, Emerson and Lake, music and lyrics. It's not a bad song, but outside of Lake's voice and the tortured Hammond, there is really little to identify it as Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It might as well have been on a Chicago album of the era, frankly. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love the records Chicago made in that era. I do.
Yeah.
The writing credits list Emerson and Lake. I would like to have heard it without outside meddling from producers, record companies, etc.
Yeah.
And then finally, Footprints in the Snow, which is a solo composition from Lake. Big strummy Lake ballad in that big strummy Lake style. Um, More lamenting of love's lost and flying arrows and shot darts. That man was carrying some pain, my friends, and he liked to use target weapons to express it on a regular basis for some reason. Some of the lyrics feel unfinished. Desert made of sand. and then he repeats that line again later in the song.
Yeah.
Greg, at this point, I expect more from you. By 1992, I expect you to spend a little more time on lyrics. And
Yeah.
again, this is my favorite band ever.
Mhm.
Um, this song just feels unfinished and probably should have been left off the album. It doesn't suck, but it really doesn't stand up. And it Footprints in the Snow kind of limps across the finish line, frankly, for me anyway.
Yeah.
That's the end of my notes.
Yes. Yes. Um, I have to concur with, I mean, you nailed all the issues with this record, okay? When I went back to listen to this album for this episode, I remembered Black Moon, remember the title track, and I remember kind of liking that song back in the day, but I hadn't listened to it in so long. So I was listening to it, and I there were moments where I was getting bored.
Yeah,
And I never get bored listening to ELP ever. Like,
yeah,
it's not something that ever happens, you know? And so it's just like, why am I bored? Why am I losing? Like, I would literally be like, is this song over yet? And I think there's times where you nailed it. It's the drums are a disaster. Let's
yeah.
just start with that. Start with that. I mean, Carl Palmer is one of the best drummers on the planet, and
Still,
yeah, and he's playing sample, like you said, he's playing "Goosh, gosh, goosh, good." It's like, what is happening? On like many songs, he's doing that.
yeah. It's
As you said, plot. It's the perfect word.
it just I don't know. I think it can. The fault can probably be laid at production. I think if Greg had produced this album on his own, it would have significantly improved the outward results. I don't. I think at this point, it just the album feels like Greg was phoning it in.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just feels that way. Now on the tour, he was not.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
the tour was stellar. He was singing well. The whole band was just playing out of their minds.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was,
But they still had it. It wasn't. It just didn't show on the album. It just didn't show
yeah,
on the record.
yeah. Well, I don't know if they were proud of the album or just promoting it, but like I said in my notes earlier, they played 6 tunes off of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean,
So
yeah.
yeah, anyway, but the only times, not the only times, but when like I said, when Carl would go to those pads, it would just change the entire it was like the air got sucked out of the room. When Carl Palmer hits a live snare drum mic'd up through a PA, that drum has been hit.
Yes.
But with a pad, it just I don't know, it just
It's not the
uh,
same. It's just not the same,
it's not the same.
not the same. And honestly, you had mentioned this too, and you're absolutely right because this is what I hear when I listen to this record. I hear heavy-handed producers. I hear record companies meddling in it and saying, "Hey, you guys, this is what's popular now. You know that stuff that you do really well. Don't do that stuff. Don't do any of that." That's what it feels like. It's like they're not playing to their strength on this record. They're trying to hey man, it's 1992. This is what's cool. And I'm telling you, I know you guys have been out of the game for a while. This is what's cool now, and this will get you on the radio or whatever.
It
Uh
feels like Union. Union was the same
yes.
way. The
Yeah.
production credits on Union are obscene.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Like 10
obscene.
people, right? I mean, it's like 10 producers.
It's the only song on there that I can recommend to anybody is Steve Howe's solo piece that he recorded by himself at home. I don't remember the name of it offhand, but
Yeah.
that's really, really good. I almost feel sorry for Steve, giving it up for that album. It's kind of buried on there.
Right.
There's
Right.
one or two things that entice, but to me, the album overall, this one, it feels similar in that it just feels overly homogenized. They're both a victim of their time, unfortunately.
Yes, yes, very much so. And you're right. The highlights were I have the same highlights. I have Changing States was actually something that I said, "Wow, okay, I really enjoy this." Like it almost
Yeah.
sounds like it could have been on this.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
sounds like it could have been on that record. And it has some fire to it and some real I really enjoy Changing States quite a bit. Like if the
Go
whole
seek out
you
go
know, if the
seek
whole
out Keith's version on their solo album, Changing States. Go seek that out if you like that one. It's really good. It
yeah.
sounds better.
I'll go check it out because I mean, that's
Yeah.
my favorite track on this record by a long shot is Changing States because it feels like real ELP. It feels like, oh, I can hear Greg playing the bass and I can hear Carl's actually sort of playing the drums. Like, okay, this
Yeah.
feels more like ELP. And then and then like you said, Close to Home is the other, it's just
Oh, I love Close to Home.
emotional. It's emotional to listen
Yeah.
to because it's pure Keith Emerson, and like you said, he's no longer with us, and it's just so sad that Greg and Keith are no longer with us. It's
Yeah.
such a loss to the music world, and I'm still sad about it. But this record was not their finest moment. I mean, okay, In the Hot Seat is worse, but that album's kind of a disaster as well. I mean,
Yeah, In the Hot Seat leans into the all the worst qualities of I mean, it's not a complete throwaway, but it's 95% throwaway.
yeah.
There are one or two redeeming things on it. They were just phoning it in at that point, and, you know, I
Well,
don't know
wasn't
what
wasn't
was going
Keith like hurt? I mean, Keith had just had surgery or something, and it just wasn't a
He
good time
yeah,
for the record. It
yeah,
wasn't.
he played precious little on that record apparently,
Yeah,
because of what you're talking about. He was having real serious problems with his hands, and that would drive him to the end of his life, honestly.
yeah,
Um, I remember pretty vividly, when Keith passed, um, Greg, who had known him forever, and their relationship was very antagonistic in a lot of ways.
yeah.
Um, the only commonality those two men had was the music. That was it. They really had nothing else in common.
Kind of
And I
feel that.
I
Yeah,
remember Greg's statement. He said, "Look, he said all kinds of glowing things about Keith, and he said, look, those of us who knew Keith are not surprised that he took his own life."
wow.
And I thought that was, yeah, it's typical Greg. He does not sugarcoat things.
Yeah,
Never did.
no.
But in a way, I thought, wow, man, really? This is the
Yeah,
moment you choose for that revelation? But
yeah,
it
yeah.
was the truth.
They
Keith
they
was,
respected each other.
yeah, they did.
Yeah,
They both did their best work with the other guy in the room.
right.
Whether it was as a duo or in a couple of different trios that they worked in, I,
Mhm,
I'm going to reiterate my point from earlier in the show. The best ELP records have two factors. Greg Lake is producing alone, and
mhm.
there's Hammond organ everywhere. By the
Yeah,
time they got to Works, there's no Hammond on that to
yeah,
speak of.
yes, yes, and
Um,
it's noticeable difference.
it suffers because that was Keith's identity for so many years. He was strictly a Hammond player in his early days.
He was
That
such a
was his,
good Hammond player.
oh, yeah, it was his soul. And if
Yeah,
you take that soul away from him, he's a fantastic piano player, obviously, but
right, right.
I, I really appreciate very much what Keith could do with the Hammond. He unlocked things that no one expected to get out of it. I think
He made the
running it
Hammond sing. He made it sing.
and scream.
Yeah, yeah. And
Anyway,
we made it scream because he was putting knives in it. No,
yeah,
but anyway, uh, yeah, I'm here all week, people. Uh,
tip your
tip your
waitress.
waitresses, yeah. So anyway, so I think it's pretty obvious. I don't know that we even have to do this, but I basically between these two, we're calling it a battle. I think it was pretty clear the winner of this battle. Would you say?
Yeah, I think so. And it's shocking to me because before I did my prep, I really thought it was going to be a tougher choice because
Yeah,
I really used to listen to Black Moon a lot, uh, but it has not worn. It's not aged well. It does not bear the burden of the years as well as the Powell record. I think.
yeah. This album, there's something about this record. It's got more spirit and energy, and I don't know how to describe it. And like you said, I think Greg's way more involved with this record, with the
Yeah,
production and right.
yeah, he
Uh,
co-produced that one.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's just that's the and you're right. You're pointing out the differences, and that's one of them. Is I mean, all those early records that are the absolute classics are produced by Greg Lake.
Yeah.
So they knew what
Yeah.
they were doing. They knew what they were doing when they were just
Yeah.
you said, leave them alone. Put them in a studio, leave them alone.
Well, yeah, that's what they did when they first signed the band,
Yeah.
and the band wasn't sure what they were gonna do, the The first album was really, the 3 guys kind of feeling each other out a little bit, to see if it was gonna work.
Yeah.
But, in those days, record companies just kind of signed great musicians, assuming that they knew what they were doing
Mhm.
and would if you leave them alone and let them make records, you were gonna make money. That was the assumption.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that time has passed.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, even the debut, I absolutely adore the debut, but you can tell that they kind of went to the studio pretty fast, and
yep,
they were like, oh, okay, and there seemed like they're kind of jamming a little bit here and there, and it's like, and then I guess Lucky Man was a last minute addition because they needed one more song, and so I love that they just kind of ran into the studio real quick and started recording. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
uh, that's definitely one of their albums. I mean, for me, if I've got to pick a favorite, it's Trilogy. But
yeah.
uh, the debut. How do you argue with that? I mean, how
It's
many debut records do you hear that are that fully formed? That the artist, I like to call it a mission statement, where the parameters of that artist's basic um, future output are all there. All the elements are already there.
yeah, yeah. Just hit record.
That's
Just hit record.
yeah. Just hit record.
Set
Exactly.
them up and hit record. That's what it feels like on that first record, and I love it. It's just that kinetic energy that they have when they get together. It's like, oh my god, the first four. I mean, really, those first four records are just kinetic energy, and I just
Yeah.
absolutely love them to death. I
Yeah.
can't get enough of them. So, um, anyway,
I don't have to be in the mood to listen to Emerson Lake and Palmer. I can put it on right now and just 3 hours later, after I've gotten several albums in, I'm just like, yeah, it doesn't get much better than that.
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. They're one of the best. I love,
Uh,
still love them. In fact, I had some friends in college who were like, I would be listening to those albums. They'd be like, "What the hell are you listening to?" Like, I'd be like listening to Tarkus while I was doing my studying or something, and they're like, "What is this crap?" Like, dude, this is Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Come on.
Emerson Lake and Palmer is like Monty Python. You either get it or you don't.
Yeah,
I mean, Monty Python is silly just for the sake of being silly. It has no preponderance of meaning to it. It's just silly.
right.
And Emerson, Lake and Palmer is pretentious and pompous. You don't have to understand it, but I respond to it in a very emotional way. I always have.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. Anyway, well, this has
so
been
I
really
guess I guess it's Powell for us. Emerson, Lake and Powell.
Emerson, Lake
Yeah,
and Powell wins it by actually quite a bit, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah,
It's I like you said, I thought it was going to be a lot closer, but it was not.
yeah.
This one
Not even
wins
close.
by
Yeah.
quite a bit. In my so let us know what you think. Like maybe somebody's like, dude, Black Moon is killer. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I love the sequence drums and I love that Carl barely plays on it. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, no, no. So anyway, but no, let us know. I mean, there could be people out there that do think Black Moon is a lot better than we do. So who knows? But anyway, I think it's an interesting era to talk about because a lot of people talk about brain salad surgery and trilogy and Tarkus and everyone talks about the same record. These are kind of a different era when we actually were buying the albums as they came out.
Yep.
We were excited. We were fans, and we were buying them as they came. So it was a kind of exciting time for us. It's kind of reminds me of the Pink Floyd we talked about on another episode with Momentary Lapse of Reason when they came back together and that came out. It was like, oh my god, I'm buying a new Pink Floyd album. I was so psyched about that. Same feeling with this
Hmm.
and this. So,
Yep.
there you go. But thanks again if you're staying with us for this long. We really appreciate it. And Scott, thank you so much. You always do such a great job.
My pleasure. It was a great time. Always a great time, Tom.
Yep, you always do an amazing job, and you're welcome back anytime. Um, so thanks again, everybody. I always have to say, like and subscribe if you like what you see, and just hit the button below, and we will see you next time on Curless Mania. Take care.